For the Red Army authorities, it was becoming increasingly evident that the BT series of fast tanks was not the ideal long-term solution for Soviet armored forces. These tanks were lightly armored and armed, yet were expected to engage enemy armor from a distance. Their capabilities fell short, particularly on the evolving battlefields of the late 1930s. Despite their innovative track design allowing them to run on bare wheels, a feature appreciated by Soviet officials for its versatility, they lacked the necessary qualities to fulfill their role effectively. In 1937, the Soviet Army formally requested a replacement for the BT series, leading to the development of a new frontline combat tank based on the BTIS proof-of-concept vehicles. Engineers introduced several prototype vehicles with progressively thicker and sloped armor, increased armament, and advancements based on the BT fast tank series. A new diesel-fueled engine, the Model V 212-cylinder, was developed, departing from the gasoline-fueled power packs of the BT series, which were prone to explosions upon impact. The final iteration, the AO-34, was adopted for service as the T-34 medium tank. Early production models in 1940 were equipped with the 76.2 mm L-11 series main gun, later replaced by the F-32 and eventually the superior F-34 series of 76.2 mm guns. The use of heavily sloped armor for ballistic protection was considered progressive for its time. The production of the T-34 gained momentum, especially following the significant shortcomings of Soviet armor during the Winter War against neighboring Finland, 1939 to 1940. However, the scarcity of the new engine and radio equipment resulted in early T-34 models being equipped with inferior Mikulin M17 power plants from the BT tanks, while radio sets were allocated exclusively to command tanks. As a result, T-34 crews were trained to rely on rudimentary battlefield signals conveyed through specialized flag movements, necessitating close visual proximity between accompanying tanks, reminiscent, to some extent, of ancient warfare practices. The T-34's introduction into service in 1940 immediately established it as the most formidable tank worldwide. It epitomized the perfect balance between speed, firepower, and armor protection, three critical elements of successful tank design, even in contemporary developments. Weighing 26 tons, the vehicle measured 22 feet in length, 10 feet in width, and 8 feet in height. Its armament included a 76.2 mm main gun, complemented by a coaxial 7.62 mm DT machine gun and a hull-mounted 7.62 mm machine gun, enhancing its anti-infantry capabilities. Once equipped with the intended engine, the Model V2 diesel-fueled 12-cylinder engine generating 500 horsepower primarily powered the T-34. This facilitated a top speed of 33 miles per hour on favorable surfaces and an operational range of 250 miles before refueling. Its coil-spring Christie-based suspension system ensured excellent cross-country performance. The T-34's success hinged on its implementation of heavily sloped, thick armor, particularly evident at the glacis plate, turret, and hull sides. The deliberately compact turret minimized its profile, presenting a smaller target to adversaries. The 5 large road wheels and wide tracks proved invaluable for navigating the soft terrains of Central and Eastern Europe in subsequent battles. Crew accommodation comprised 4 personnel: the driver, commander/loader, gunner, and bow machine gunner. Notably, the commander assumed the additional role of loader in early T-34 variants due to the confined space within the small turret. In contrast, Western tanks in Britain, America, and Germany typically operated with a 5-man crew to enhance operational efficiency. In June of 1941, the Germans launched Operation Barbarossa, their invasion of the Soviet Union, as part of Hitler's ambitious plan to defeat the Communists in the East. The campaign was initially expected to be swift and decisive, mirroring the successes achieved in Poland, France, and the Low Countries in the preceding months and year. Despite early advances being impressive, the harsh Soviet winter ultimately stalled the German advance towards Moscow, providing the Red Army with crucial time to regroup, reorganize its forces, and establish new production facilities in the Urals to the east. Although the T-34 had been introduced in the fall of 1940, formal training for T-34 tank crews did not commence until the spring of 1941, leaving them less prepared for the sudden onslaught of the German invasion. In the initial engagements, German tank crews and anti-tank teams were shocked to find their 37 mm tank-killing, armor-piercing shells bouncing off the thick hulls and turrets of the advancing T-34s. However, the effectiveness of the Soviet response was hindered by poorly trained tank crews, outdated armored warfare doctrine, and chaotic reactions. At the onset of the invasion, the Soviet Army was still organizing its new armored units, further complicating matters. Training for T-34 crews was conducted without access to the actual tanks, exacerbating the situation. Additionally, the T-34 suffered from frequent mechanical breakdowns in the field, largely due to inexperienced drivers, resulting in a higher loss rate than enemy action. Only an estimated 1,000 to 1,200 T-34s were available at the time of the German invasion, thinly spread across multiple fronts, giving the German army a numerical advantage. Perhaps as few as 150 tank crew members were adequately trained in the operation of the T-34, while others had experience only with the unrelated T-26 light tank series. However, there were isolated instances where T-34s, when properly utilized alongside KV-1 heavy tanks, achieved success by employing a more German-like armored warfare doctrine. Moreover, working conditions for T-34 crews were rudimentary, and communication using flag signals was cumbersome and hazardous for both the commander and the tank itself. Early versions of the T-34 had a single heavy hatch on the turret roof, which was unpopular among tank crews. Visibility from within the tank was limited, and the gunnery sighting equipment was inferior to that used by the Germans. Disruption of key T-34 production facilities further exacerbated the challenges, resulting in less than optimal quality control. Despite its shortcomings, when operated efficiently and in sufficient numbers under competent leadership, the T-34 proved to be unmatched by contemporary tanks in the early stages of the war. German light tanks such as the Panzer I and II were clearly outmatched, and the Panzer III and IV series vehicles struggled to penetrate the T-34's thick frontal armor while lacking adequate protection themselves. The potent penetrative capabilities of the Soviet 76.2 mm main gun, especially after the switch to the F-34 gun, forced the Germans to develop countermeasures. Despite its rudimentary design, the T-34 was an effective weapon, and when available in large numbers, it posed a significant obstacle for the invading German forces. By the end of 1941, the Soviet Union had 2,810 T-34s ready for combat. Variants of the T-34 abounded throughout its production line. The initial model was the T-34 Model 1934, T-34 divided by 76A, equipped with the 76.2 mm L-11 main gun and powered by inferior BT fast tank MT-17 gasoline engines due to shortages of the intended power pack. Following this was the T-34 Model 1941, T-34 divided by 76B, featuring the improved 76.2 mm F-34 tank gun in a cast or welded turret. The T-34 Model 1941, T-34 divided by 76C, appeared in 1942 with increased armor protection, new road wheels, tracks, and a revised driver's hatch, with many tanks sporting cast turrets. The T-34 Model 1942, T-34 divided by 76D, introduced the hexagonal turret with twin roof hatches, followed by the T-34 divided by 76E with a new commander's cupola, and the T-34 divided by 76F featuring a rounded turret design. The T-34/57 was essentially a T-34/76 fitted with the ZIS 457 mm anti-tank gun for enhanced tank killing capability. Despite its larger caliber, the 57 mm gun offered better penetration values against enemy tanks. These tanks were primarily used for the defense of Moscow after significant German advances in the preceding offensive and closely resembled basic T-34 tanks. The ZIS-4 gun was derived from the earlier ZIS-2 series system, with approximately 42 T-34/57 tanks believed to have been produced starting from September 1941. The OT-34 was a modified T-34/76 with its bow-mounted machine gun replaced by a flamethrower, though these tanks differed little from standard combat-oriented variants. The T-34M was an early, short-lived prototype featuring torsion bar suspension instead of Christie suspension, along with new road wheels, improved ranges, ammunition storage, and a three-man hexagonal turret design. Unfortunately, this design was abandoned after the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Command and control tanks included the T-34K and T-34G models. The T-34K was equipped with the RSB radio set, reducing the 76 mm projectile count to 39 rounds. The T-34G featured radio sets with increased transmission ranges of up to 120 km. German commanders transmitted their operational observations of the T-34 back to Germany, prompting the capture of a pair of intact examples for formal examination by engineers. The Germans were impressed by several key features of the Soviet design, including the wide tracks, large road wheels, slope-thick armor, and powerful main gun. Particularly noteworthy were the large road wheels, which effectively mitigated mud and snow buildup, a problem the Germans had not addressed with their overlapping road wheels. Additionally, the wide tracks enabled the Soviet design to carry heavier armor and armament across soft terrains. While the T-34 initially outmatched its German counterparts, German engineers diligently worked on developing a countermeasure to the Soviet threat. This effort eventually culminated in the development of the formidable Panzer V Panther medium tank, although in the interim, the Tiger I heavy tank was deployed. Armed with the renowned 88mm main gun, derived from an effective anti-tank gun system based on an earlier anti-aircraft design, the Tiger I possessed superior range to the T-34's 76.2mm main armament and boasted thick frontal armor, rendering it well protected. Both the Tiger I and Panther tanks entered service starting in late 1942, alongside the German Pak 40 75mm anti-tank field guns, capable of penetrating Soviet armor. The German 75mm gun was also utilized as the primary armament in upgun Panzer IV tanks, as well as in the Stu-G 3/Stu-G 4/Jag Panzer IV tank destroyers. Despite the difference in caliber, the German 75mm tank gun outperformed the Soviet 76.2mm gun. As the war progressed, a growing number of T-34s fell victim to the German 75mm and 88mm guns. In the Oral Operation of 1943 alone, approximately 40% of T-34 losses were attributed to 75mm guns, with an additional 26% to the 88mm guns. Like their German counterparts, Soviet engineers embarked on the development of a new combat tank, designated the T-43, primarily in response to the increased use of the long-barreled 75mm gun by the Germans. However, the advanced design of the T-43 failed to surpass the performance capabilities of the T-34 it was intended to replace. Its new armor configuration offered no guarantees against the formidable German 88 or even the 75mm guns. Consequently, it was decided to produce a modified variant of the T-34 with a more powerful, long-barreled 85mm main gun mounted on a turret based on the KV-85 heavy tank family. The incorporation of the new turret design allowed for a dedicated loader for the main gun, thereby relieving the commander of that duty and enabling him to focus on directing his crew. Additionally, a new 5-speed transmission system was introduced, essentially resulting in an upgunned T-34-76. This upgraded tank, designated the T-34-85, entered service in 1944, with 12,000 units in circulation by the end of the war. The T-34-85 underwent several notable production variations during the war and in the post-war years. While the T-34-85 did not provide a definitive solution to the threat posed by the Panther tank, it did help to level the playing field to some extent. The Panther remained superior in terms of armor and armament, with the T-34 showing signs of aging. However, the Soviet advantage in numbers allowed T-34s to overwhelm enemy positions. Despite comparatively high losses, Soviet war planners deemed this acceptable. In practice, multiple T-34-85 tanks would be employed to attack a single Panther from all angles other than the heavily armored front, often with favorable results when targeting the weaker side and rear panels. Additionally, the Soviet Army introduced the IS Joseph Stalin heavy tank in 1943, equipped with a massive 122mm main gun and thick all-around armor, providing a formidable complement to the T-34-85. Production of the T-34 continued uninterrupted until the conclusion of the European campaign in 1945, with a staggering total of 57,000 T-34s in circulation by that time. In fact, the T-34 replaced production of all other Soviet combat tank types during peak usage, with 42 factories participating in its production. This made the T-34 the most numerous of all Soviet armored vehicles used in the war. Factories including No. 183, Kharkov, No. 183, Nizhny Tagil, the STZ plant, No. 112, Kharkiv-Sormovo, CHKZ, Uralmash, and plant No. 174 contributed to production, each producing slightly varying end products due to differences in manufacturing processes. Production figures illustrate the rapid escalation of T-34 manufacturing during the war, from only 97 units in 1940, production surged to 3,000 in 1941, 12,500 in 1942, and reached a peak of 15,700 in 1943. Although production tapered off in the final years, with only 4,000 units produced in 1944, the T-34 remained a cornerstone of Soviet armored forces. Throughout its service, the T-34 primarily utilized the L-11, F-34, and ZIS-4 series guns, with 746 L-11 examples, 38,580 F-34 examples, and 212 ZIS-4 examples being produced. Powering these tanks were some 96,182 Model V-2 diesel engines, produced during the war in factories that also employed women workers. The T-34 became an enduring symbol of the Soviet struggle against Germany in the post-war years, despite its imperfections as a combat tank. While the T-34-76 largely fell out of favor after the war, the T-34 continued in service in its T-34-85 guise, with many being delivered to Soviet allies and satellite states. Overall production spanned from 1940 to 1958, totaling 84,000 examples. The versatile chassis formed the basis for various specialized vehicles, including bridge layers, self-propelled gun platforms, and armored recovery vehicles. Notably, the T-34 was even utilized as a makeshift, fast personnel carrier, alarming German troops who found themselves confronted by T-34s loaded with Soviet infantry. Other notable variants included flame tanks, mine clearance vehicles, and tank destroyers armed with 100mm and 122mm guns. As many as 20,000 T-34s were either captured or destroyed by the Germans in combat. The T-34 saw widespread adoption beyond Russian borders, with numerous countries becoming operators of this iconic tank. Among them were Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, Angola, Austria, Bulgaria, China, Congo, Cyprus, Czechoslovakia, Cuba, Finland, East Germany, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Hungary, Indonesia, Iraq, Laos, Libya, Mali, Mongolia, Mozambique, Namibia, North Korea, Palestine, Poland, Romania, Somalia, South Yemen, Sudan, Syria, Togo, Vietnam, Yugoslavia, and Zimbabwe. Additionally, production of T-34s was undertaken in Czechoslovakia, Poland, and China, further contributing to its widespread use. Some smaller militaries still operate T-34-85 tanks as of 2012, attesting to the enduring legacy and continued relevance of this legendary armored vehicle. During the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, the North Korean Army deployed approximately 120 T-34-85 tanks, which proved highly effective in early round action but faced challenges during the NATO counteroffensive. Upgraded American tanks such as the M4 Sherman, M46 Patton, and M26 Pershing proved formidable opponents, resulting in the loss of nearly 100 T-34-85 tanks. The T-34-85, in particular, struggled against the M26 Pershing, which had been introduced in the European theater during the closing weeks of World War II. For the Soviets, the T-34 served as the foundation for other successful tanks of the Cold War era. The renowned T-54/T-55 series directly descended from the T-34 and went on to become the most produced tank line in history, numbering over 85,000 and potentially reaching as many as 100,000 units. Despite this, the T-34 remains the second most produced combat tank in history. A related development, the short-lived T-44, was intended as a direct successor to the T-34 and also featured the 85mm ZIS S-53 series gun. However, only a few hundred T-44 tanks were completed, and they arrived too late to see action in Europe. The T-44 line was plagued by mechanical issues and was ultimately retired from service.